Keith and Richard, can I ask you what's interested you about this project so far, and what's hooked you to make this commitment to the fieldwork here already and coming few weeks?
What attracted me was it was a corner of Kent I knew nothing about, and when I started looking, I don't think any other archaeologist knew much about it. It's between all the towns. Nobody ever comes here. There's no field work being done here, so it's a completely unknown quantity. And the little bit of work we have done, it only amounts to a few days. We've already started to turn up archaeology of all sorts, virtually everywhere, and I think there's vast amounts to be had here, probably for not a great deal of effort, a lot of it. It really is quite really high potential for this area, and it's completely unknown. It's really the unknown bit, I think, that attracts me to it.
So that first morning along the field is really good. Yeah, so, and they're all up, and what you've got there, there's a carpet of them.
Much the same, actually. The unknown element of it, apart from looking at aerial photography and things like that, I think is fascinating. And certainly the area that I ended up excavating at Stringman's field is something you don't get to do every day. In terms of what we discovered, in that we've got a prehistoric monument of some description that has been sat there for thousands of years, unknown, untouched, and we were the first ones to see it in such a long time and explore it.
And the dating evidence that has now come through based on the pottery makes the story much more interesting than we originally thought.
Yeah, the dating evidence is what surprised me, in that we had stratified mid-Neolithic pottery, which I wasn't expecting at all. And we've also got contiguous pottery throughout the stratigraphy into Middle Bronze Age and into Iron Age as well. So it looks like the feature, the monument that we were excavating in Stringman's field was used or occupied for a long time.
So at first, I mean, we thought perhaps in the field there was perhaps some Neolithic, flint scatters, something like that. And then into the Bronze Age, it became a focus for burials, activity like that. And we were looking perhaps at a series of barrows with ring ditches around them, of which the feature that you excavated we thought was probably going to fit into that picture, but it's much more complicated or interesting or enigmatic, and we're still exploring the possibilities. You'll go back to that site, will you?
We'll go back to that site next year and hopefully do a larger excavation, a quadrant, put the quadrant over the southwest corner to see if we can investigate it further and determine its actual function and its role. But like you say, the really interesting thing for me is looking at the whole landscape in terms of, do we have a prehistoric ritual burial area? I think the possibilities are really quite interesting.
It's on the edge of a valley, isn't it? And it's now a dry valley that sort of drives itself up into North Kent, the North Kent Plain, Faversham area. Do you think that's an important access way in the past?
I think it might be, we walked up there, and looking at it today, on those slopes there are very clear plough banks, lynchets, which means they have been cultivated in the past, those steep slopes, which suggests that there's a lot of people about, because it's not prime land, steep slope, chalk slope like that, so it implies there's a lot of people about. And today I've been wandering about, and there's prehistoric structure over all the fields. It's much the same as the one we looked at in Stringman's, but it's pretty much everywhere. And it might be an area that's very little known to archaeologists, but I think it's well known to prehistoric man. They obviously have fully sussed out this place, and it looks like they're here from the Neolithic through into the Bronze Age, right the way through. So I suspect we're looking at just starting to glimpse an ancient landscape that's going to come right through, and there'll be some Iron Age and Roman in there somewhere. They'll be around in due course, but it'll be right at the beginning of the whole study at the moment. But I think it's got very high potential, this. And as you as you said, the landowner in the former Lady Swan's absolutely keen to do it. I mean, so often we just about manage to get on these sites, grudgingly allowed on for a fortnight. Here we can sort of do pretty much what we want, I think, within reason.
And that's what makes this a special opportunity.
Absolutely.
And Clive, Secretary of the KAS, is talking about a 15-year long project, which is ambitious, but there is plenty of archaeology here, clearly, from what we've seen.
I think there's easily 15 years worth of archaeology here. Probably there'll be 25 years by the time we've done 15, I suspect, because we're going to find more as we go along. And I suspect in 10 years' time we'll look back and think, Christ, if we'd known then what we know now, sort of thing, It's going to look very different,
so
I think.
there's a sort of hidden landscape that
I think so.
we're beginning to reveal.
Just touching it. I mean, when we're talking about total field work done in the area so far, what it amounts to 2 or 3 weeks at most, spread over different places at different times. Already there's a lot of detail starting to show there.
Can you remind us how we're discovering some of that detail through remote sensing, etc., geophysics, photography, the drone, new equipment that we've got for the KAS?
I think we're very fortunate at the KAS because we've invested in a lot of new equipment. We've got a differential GPS, we've got geophysics equipment as a magnetometer, and we've also got a drone, a high definition drone. So a combination of those three, I think, enables us to see beyond the surface of the ground and get a very clear picture, I think, of the potential landscape underneath. So I think that's a very sound investment for these next 15 or 20 years, whatever it is, that we're here actually looking at this area.
So what did the geophysics produce when you did that survey, sort of April, May?
Well, we did a relatively small geophysical survey in Stringman's field, which revealed the existing enclosure that we could see on the aerial photography.
Which brought us here in the first place, I think.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But we also found another smaller, looks like partial ring ditch further towards Stringman's farm to the east. Yes, to the east. So that's another potential target. And one of our aims for this year is to actually geophysics the whole of Stringman's field and as much as Woodcourt field as we can to get a clear picture, to give us some targets to go and visit in the future for excavation.
So the information's building.
I think it is. It's building very quickly. And I think the other interesting thing is we're quite high up on the chalk downs here. And certainly in this area we're on clay with flint. It's not good quality land, especially for prehistoric folk to farm. It's difficult land to farm.
Pushing
yeah,
hard
if indeed they're doing, unless they're
cultivate
just doing
clear the
pasture.
trees.
But it's not prime quality land. But they are up here, and they're up here in some numbers, which presumably means they've already exhausted the good stuff probably further down the slope towards Faversham, I'd guess.
And could that mean that population? It's to do with population increase, something like that. They're looking for new resources.
I suspect it is, yes. And then we come back to these steep hillsides being ploughed and the lynchets forming on it. Well, again, you're only going to plough up 45 degree slopes if you're pushed into it. You're not going to do it, just because you fancy it. You need all the land you can get, and that's going to be sort of some of the last stuff on your list. But then, well, we're going to have to use that now because there's nothing else to use. So they're going to go for these slopes, I think. So it does imply there's a lot of people about.
I think that's really very interesting, because I think there's been an assumption in the past, hasn't there, that the North Downs, with very little, if any, surface water here, intractable, clay with flints. Difficult terrain to move through in many ways, probably quite wooded in various areas with those slopes as well. Has a much larger extent of archaeology than we thought before.
I mean, precisely what you said is how it always used to be viewed around Dover. Now, field work that I've been involved with for the last 40 years more now has proved that in fact that's not the case. There is stuff going on the high downs, lots of struck flints, prehistoric barrows and all the rest of it. But there's one slight difference with the Dover end of things in that we're near the English Channel, and it may well be that there were perhaps forces at work there that drew prehistoric men up onto those high clay lands that we thought weren't particularly attractive because they were near the Channel, and it was, there were lots of people coastal based. But now we come up here further into the hinterland of Kent, we see exactly the same pattern starting to emerge in broad terms. So it looks like they are here as well. Now it's not that far to the sea down the slope, but it's some distance away. So I think if you live up here, you're probably not going to be going down to Faversham Creek on a regular basis because you're going to be based up here. So it seems to me that there's a lot going on up here, and probably everywhere between here and the coast as well. So I think there's a lot, and I think we look beyond this, of course. The implication then is that it's going to apply to all of Kent, because this is a block of ground that apparently didn't seem to have much going on it. Well, it has got things going on it. Chances are other places are going to be the same.
Possibly not just burials, but there could be settlement.
I think so.
Well, that's what interests me, is that idea of settlement up here, and so closely associated with burials perhaps, or in the near vicinity. I think that's quite an interesting concept in terms of population spread.
Yeah, and if you've got dead to bury, I don't think you're going to be hauling them miles up onto the downs, are you? You're just going to put them nearby. There is, as you know, in Holly Grove, this upstanding mound that seems to be a Bronze Age burial mound, previously unrecognised. And what's interesting, I think, about that one is that if you stand on the top of the plateau and look across, you can't see it. You can only see it from the bottom of the valley below, or on the other side of the valley to the west, northwest, I think. And that, to me, suggests they're the places we need to be looking for the settlements, not up on the top, but maybe down in some of those valley bottoms, in which case they're probably going to... And they're maybe down by the water, if there's water coming through in those valleys. It's quite deep, that valley there. So that may be a clue, although I suspect it's going to be deeply buried under downwash soil if there's anything there.
There could be preservation.
Absolutely, it could be very good, but you have to eat it first.
Those points are very interesting, because often in archaeology we think of the dead being very visible, for the living. That the cemetery monuments, the long barrows, the round barrows, in the Roman period, perhaps enclosed cemeteries, they are nearby to settlement, close by, so that you can visit them, you can see them, that they're marking the landscape, so that they have an active role for the living, rather than marginalised and hidden away. So and that you can process to and have memorial ceremonies with and visit. So they're not that. There's a proximity between the living and the dead. So that's very interesting. You should point that out in this case. One of the other intriguing things for me is also how people move through the landscape, and I reflected on my own life recently and thought, well, I'm constantly going along the same roads, along the same pathways, along the same streets. It's a very, very small world that I'm moving through on these established access roads and train journeys. People are moving along the same channels all the time. It's very, very restricted, unless you go out for a sort of countryside walk or something like that on the pathways. But so we've got a very sort of channeled way about how we move through the landscape, and it's from often these days from one economic point to another, or commuting to and from work. And in the past, there's presumably all this landscape here that people were moving around in different ways to access different resources for different purposes. And because somewhere like here is not on a normal routine pathway, because we're going along the sort of M20 or the A2, or the bypass round Sandwich or something like that. Very sort of channeled. But in the past, do you think people were moving around the landscape in different ways, and can we see that perhaps in this particular case?
I think they must be, mustn't they? I suppose the other thing is we say it's isolated up here, but why is it isolated up here? Only because it's not near Faversham town or a railway station or the motorway. But if you haven't got any of those things, maybe it is actually quite a centre up here, and maybe some of these other places that aren't the key areas. Because I've thought about this before. it's only isolated by our standards. But if there are buildings up here and everyone comes here to do this, that or the other, it's not isolated, is it? Especially if it's got sort of trackways leading to it. It's only isolated in the modern landscape because the modern landscape and the settlement pattern has moved away from that. But if it's not that settlement pattern we're working to, maybe it's not isolated in these sort of places. A lot of practical notes. I was interested that your ring ditch got a public right of way going through it.
Yeah, I don't know if that's coincidence.
Well, I don't think
not.
it is. No, I think it's an old footpath. Yeah. It indicates there was a burial mound there, not so a burial mound, somewhere there, and people used to cut across the field and they'd head straight for the mound.
Yeah, I did actually think that because public rights of way tend to follow path of least resistance, and I don't think that landscape has changed much over thousands of years, and perhaps that is, a channel, if you like, of access to that higher ground. It's quite interesting, Do people change? Do people's habits change?
That's a very interesting point. With my students at the university, I show them a couple of slides in a PowerPoint presentation, whereby we're looking at two 20th century paintings of long barrows in the sandy part of the Netherlands, and there are footpaths going through that landscape. Now it's sort of heathland, sandy heathland, and so the monuments are still upstanding. So we've got the pathway, and it's going past the long barrows in both of these cases. There's probably others. So what came first, the pathway or the long barrow? It makes you think about the landscape and how people are using it, and why monuments are there and why access routes are there, and how people punctuate the landscape and how they move through it, and how they adjust how they move through it for different sort of reasons, not just the economic ones that we were talking about just now, but for other things to do with what's going on in the mind, in culture, and in terms of tradition.
Yeah, going back to the footpath that goes to your ring ditch, it goes to your ring ditch, doesn't go to the big mound you can still see in Holly Grove, does it? Because you can't see it from the top, you've got nothing to aim at, but yours being that little bit further up the slope and it's almost on the skyline, isn't it? From the flat top. So I think in the way you're coming to it from the plateau side of it, but you're not going to the one we can still see because you can't see that. So I think that's it. Then once you get to your barrow, then you can pick your best way down into the valley. So I think that's telling us quite a lot, actually.
What do you think about prospective work in the next few weeks through late August, September, in terms of the geophysical survey and the targets for that, and then the follow-up excavation? What sort of ideas and plans do we have for that, do you think?
Well, I'd be very interested to see what the geophysics comes up with regarding the field with the hoards in it, to see if there are any structures or any good results that we can pick up on there. Because like all of us, I'm very interested in the fact that there's such a concentration of hoards within such a small area. Well, there must be a reason for that.
Even one hoard, were they?
One hoard's very rare, two very rare again, three wouldn't even entertain it, would you? So I think that's quite interesting, and there has been this long expectation of these hoards just being buried in the middle of nowhere, but I'm not sure that's going to be the case,
I can't see how it can be here. There's too much in close proximity.
The idea is that ancient man used to bury these hoards in the middle of nowhere for safekeeping. That's been the standard sort of thought. But somehow they never got back to collect it. Well, there must be an awful lot of people with bad memories that actually didn't get back to get these hoards, because we've got hundreds of these things, haven't we? So it's just not looking as if that's right. But it's just not right, is it?
No.
So we're now looking at... So the old theory's wrong, but we haven't really got a new one yet, so I think we need a new theory. I think the simple things, I think they're buried in settlements. It's as simple as that. I reckon they're just in settlements. And I say, if we get a Bronze Age roundhouse to go with that hoards we've had up there, I should be a happy man, but I won't be particularly surprised.
Well,
I should be pleased, but not surprised.
Increasing evidence that in the Iron Age they're marking boundaries with deposits like this, you know, so-called currency bars, coins,
supposedly,
things like that. So, you know, perhaps this is the context for something that Kent is reasonably well known for, which is Bronze Age hoards. But, you know, to have 4 come up in one weekend was extraordinary.
A bit silly, really, wasn't it?
So the discovery of the context of that through the geophysics and then follow-up excavation is going to be really quite exciting.
Well, I think so. And if we find nothing, well, we'll just go back to the old theory and say, well, perhaps they're right at least on some occasions. So I think we'll come out with something out of this. I suspect, you know, this time next year we're actually going to be awash with new information on all sorts of things.
Excellent. It's exciting prospect.
I think it is.
Yeah.